Hey, and welcome back to Animation Study Group, the series where I, a beginner in animation, encourage you to follow along as we work our way through this, the Animator Survival Kit by Richard Williams. This is episode 10. It feels like a real milestone. At this point in the series, I'm still very much at the beginning of my animation journey, but we're making consistent and steady progress, and it feels great. Also, I haven't had any takers in the group participation sort of element of this video series, but I have been seeing a steady, albeit modest, uptick in subscribers. So that's great to see, and thank you for tuning in. I hope that you're enjoying these videos and that you're making some progress yourself. As promised in the last episode, we're going to keep this episode simple and concise. In this one, we're returning to spacing, but this time I'm going to focus on perspective. Since the last episode, I've gotten through a section of the book where Richard Williams gets really in the weeds about the positioning of pegs on your traditional animation setup, so top versus bottom pegs in something that looks a little like this. It was interesting to read about, but for me at this point it's not incredibly relevant, so I won't review it in this video series. If you want to check that out, check out the book. After that section, the book starts to get into perspective. It gives a lot of different examples, so I think I might be able to spend the next couple episodes really delving into some perspective-based exercises. Today's episode is specifically going to be focused on how an arc of motion is spaced out when you're looking at it positioned vertically versus when you're looking at it positioned horizontally. And hopefully that makes sense. But basically, what I'm going to do is animate a circle going in a loop vertically, and I'll transpose that animation into a circle that is going in a loop horizontally. I found it pretty surprising how an arc of motion will be spaced differently depending on your perspective. With all that intro out of the way, let's cut over to the typical sped up animation process footage, and afterwards I'll let it loop and dissect it and sort of take it apart and talk about what I learned. Let's get into it. Alright, you'll see some slight changes from the animation footage. I did go in and add some glow to the two circles, and I also added a black background just so the color and motion really stands out. I've also taken the animation and reframed it in twos just to kind of slow it down, and I took the two animations and kind of chopped them up and looped them across the timeline and made an interesting pattern out of them. So as it cycles through, you've got the horizontal loop, the vertical loop. You've got both at the same time, which I think is really cool because the colors have some transparency, and when they merge together, the blue and the yellow sort of turns green. I think that's just kind of neat. Now that this is looped for a bit, I'm going to break it down so that I can talk about how I transposed that vertical loop into the horizontal loop, and ultimately how the change in perspective affected the change in spacing. So what you're looking at here is the rough sketch that got me started, and we're looking at the vertical loop, and I have the onion skin visible for each frame of the vertical loop. It might be a little bit difficult to see here because it does get fainter as you get further from the frame we're looking at, but if you look closely, you've got a little faint green circle continuing all the way around the black circle here. Then if you want that same motion to be viewed on a horizontal plane, you're going to sort of transpose it, and I just flipped up to the horizontal loop layer with all the onion skins turned on. When I first sat down and started to sketch out my rough image here, I mapped out the spacing of how I thought the horizontal loop would be. And I started spacing my circles evenly across that loop. The book shows you that that's not really correct, and this process helped me understand why. What I did was map out all of the spacing on the vertically oriented loop. You take the centers of your circles and drag them up in a straight line to where they would sit on the horizontal loop. I drew a rough idea of what the horizontal loop was going to be so that I had a place to drag these circles up to. I'm trying to make these lines as straight as possible What you'll notice is as we sort of transpose the centers of these circles up onto the loop up top, you have the spacing really compressing toward the edge of the loop. And like I said, when I first sat down to do this without reading the book, I didn't do this intuitively. My spacing was even across the whole horizontal loop, so my overlap was similar for each circle. That just didn't look right, and now I know why, which is pretty cool. Hopefully that makes sense and is easy enough to see in this video, but if you have any questions, feel free to drop them down below. Like I said, I will probably be covering perspective in the next couple videos, and I might review some of these concepts again if it makes sense. This exercise was pretty cool, and it's pretty exciting. I think I'll be able to apply what I learned here to sprucing up the Zagreus animation from the last exercise. I want to revisit that and make it as good as I think it can be, specifically for the sword swing. I spaced that out before I read this chapter, and from what I learned here, I think the spacing of the swing should cluster up more at the bottom and the top of the arc because it's positioned sort of straight on to the camera. So I'm excited to go back and give that a try and to see if I'm right about what I learned in this exercise. That's going to do it for this one. As always, thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next episode. Take care. I almost forgot that I intended to do kind of a bonus lesson for this episode. For the folks out there that are also using opentoonz, I may as well teach you how to add effects. Like I mentioned before, we've got a glow effect added to both of the paint layers of our animation here. So I'm going to pause this. And up in the right hand corner, you can see what opentoonz calls rooms. We've got drawing, cleanup, palette, ink and paint, animation, schematic, X-sheet, tasks, and browser. Personally, I find myself using drawing, animation, and schematic the most. I haven't found a ton of use for cleanup, palette, ink and paint, tasks, or browser. We did explore the X-sheet in the X-sheets episode, and I'm sure I'll find a use for these other rooms. But for now, let's jump over to the schematic room. So once you're here, you're probably going to see the stage schematic, and that has all of your different levels and how they are associated. This is the view that you want to use if you're going to rig up a character, or if you want different layers to move together when you use the animate tool. Eventually I'll do a video where we get into that a little more specifically. For now, I'm going to toggle over to the FX schematic. And over here, you can still see all of your different levels, but we've also got effects here. To add an effect, you're going to right click the field here, and under add effects, you've got this whole list of categories to choose from. For this specific animation, what I chose was under light and bloom IWA. I don't really know what that IWA stands for, but I know that it's going to apply a bloom effect to a layer. And once you've got that bloom effect or whatever effect you want to go for, you're going to grab the output of a level. You're going to plug it into the source of an effect. You're going to take the output of the effect and run that down to the input on your X sheet. And that'll do it. The way that you view the effect is you toggle on preview here, and that's basically going to show you what a rendered frame is going to look like. opentoonz really slows down when you toggle preview on because it's rendering as you go. You'll notice down below a lot of this bar has turned red now. So if I wanted to play the animation, it's going to have to render each frame before it'll play the animation smoothly. Once that is fully rendered, you can watch the whole preview. Typically what I like to do is pull up the preview just to edit the effect, and you can edit that with the effects editor to make sure it looks the way that I want it to look. And then I will turn off the preview to continue animating or doing whatever I need to do. And then I won't see how the animation looks with the effect on until I do the final render at the end. Hopefully that all makes sense. For this one in particular, I know that you have to turn on alpha rendering to make that black box disappear. That's all I've done with this example. If I decide to use other effects in the future, maybe I'll jump back in here and kind of show you what I've done there. On Bloom IWA, you can adjust the gamma, gain, and size. So fiddle with that as you desire. And now for real this time, that'll do it. So until next time, take care.